have invited Professor Furkan Kamar, the General Secretary of AIU, and we are celebrating, sir, as usual we are celebrating. We thank you, sir, for coming over all the from Delhi to participate in the Professor G. Ram Reddy birthday celebrations. And Vice Chancellor took leave to invite you, sir, and inviting Professor Arugopal Garu and the Memorial Trust. And we wanted to celebrate in a grand manner. Because of him only we are here. I am also one of the beneficiaries of people who got employment opportunities. And sir, in memory of his services, we are organizing. And I thank you one and all for coming over here to participate in this lecture. And now I request our Vice Chancellor to conduct the proceedings of the meeting.
Professor Furkan Kamarji, Secretary General of Association of Indian Universities, and also formerly Vice Chancellor of University of Rajasthan and Central University of Himachal Pradesh, and who kindly accepted our invitation. And also, though the time was very less and he could accept our invitation and come over here to deliver this lecture on a very important topic, most relevant to the present times, that is regulatory reforms in higher education. And another highly respected guest of honor, my teacher, Professor Hargopal, Secretary of Professor G. Ram Reddy Memorial Trust, and formerly Professor of University of Hyderabad. And I also extend a warm welcome to highly respected Srimati Pramila Professor G. Ram Reddy Garu, and another my respected teacher, Professor V.S. Prasad Garu, and Professor V. Bhaskar Rao Garu, and members from the Memorial Trust, and faculty members of university. As you know very well, we are doing this program regularly with a lot of respect and homage to Professor G. Ram Reddy, who is a great educationist, doyen of distant education in our India. You know very well why we conduct such memorial lectures in memory of the great personalities. We have to inherit the values which they have established in their practice of their life in various institutions and various fields of the society. Especially with regard to Professor G. Ram Reddy, he is not only a person, he is a great educational administrator, educationist, institution builder, and responsible and instrumental for the establishment of open and distant education institutions like First Open University in India and IGNOU, and also the great institutions like NAC when he was UGC chairman. And he is not only responsible for democratizing the higher education, and he is known for his democratic nature and democratic values and democratic practices in the universities. So we have to continue that inheritance and succession. Like inheritance of family, inheritance of intellectuals, and inheritance of various practices in the society. Some, if they are not relevant to society, they will get end there itself. But some of the most relevant and useful, where they will not end there and they will be continued. And they will be continued with the other personalities who were influenced by the such persons who have put into practice the first time. In that way, Professor G. Ram Reddy is most relevant to us continuously. We have to inherit his values and his practices and his democratic nature and his democratic functioning, especially in the administration and all that. So, to commemorate his great ideas and values. Every year we conduct this program with great homage and respect. Not only that, and we invite the academicians and great personalities who are really upholding the values of democracy in the universities, in the university administration, in the higher education. No doubt, Professor Furqan Qamar belongs to such category. He belongs to such tribe who respects democracy, who also democratizing the higher education through AIU. He is doing a lot of effort to continue the values established by Professor G. Ram Reddy. For that reason only, we have invited Professor Furqan Qamarji to this program. In fact, he was to come to earlier program which took place in our university as a guest of honor.
Chief guest for today's memorial lecture, Professor Furqan Qamar, Secretary General AIU, New Delhi, and formerly the Vice Chancellor of University of Rajasthan and Central University of Himachal Pradesh. Guest of honor, Sir Professor G. Hargopal sir. Then the former Vice Chancellor of my own university, Professor Prasad sir, Madam Pramila Reddy garu, and Mrs. Hargopal, then Vasudeva garu, and all my former colleagues of this university, Subbarao sir, and then Ramlinga Reddy garu, who is from the family of Ram Reddy sir. I definitely reiterate the statement made by Professor Venkataya that Professor G. Ram Reddy has made definitely an impeccable contribution to the landscape of higher education in this country. Probably he was the first reformer of higher education. Out of his own hard efforts, he could carve out a separate dispensation called open education in this country. That has really gone on to become a model for 14 other universities, that includes even a national open university. We are definitely proud to be associated with this university as academicians and probably in a limited sense academic administrators. The theme on which the chief guest, speaker of the day, is going to deliver a lecture on is probably a fitting tribute we could rather pay to the great educational administrator of India, Professor G. Ram Reddy. That is on reforms of higher education in India. Ram Reddy sir himself was a great reformist, so naturally it befits the occasion, and we definitely thank Furqan Qamar on your behalf and on behalf of the university, on my own personal behalf, for making it convenient, at least for the second time, to pay a visit to our university. Thank you very much. And we have been organizing memorial lecture in the name of the greatest contributor to the field of distance education of this country, Professor Ram Reddy, for the last 3 years on the campus. In 2016, we had none other than another great administrator called Rajan Velulkar, ex-Vice Chancellor Yashwantrao Chava, Maharashtra Open University, Nashik. In 2016, the theme chosen by him was Landscape of Higher Education in 21st Century. It was followed up with a memorial lecture on contribution of G. Ram Reddy to higher education. It was delivered by Dr. Vaidyanathan Iyer in 2017. This is third in the series, at least on the campus. And I, for one, strongly feel that the purpose for which we have assembled here is to commemorate the contributions of G. Ram Reddy. It also gives us an opportunity and a challenge to rededicate ourselves to the ideals for which the great academic administrator, educational expert, educational reformer, Professor G. Ram Reddy stood for. We have got to carry on the legacy of G. Ram Reddy further into future, giving a stronger hope for the generations who have really missed out their first opportunity of getting themselves educated in the portals of higher education institution further. That's possible only when we actually pay a homage to Professor Ram Reddy by recalling OSIL values and then place a premium on them in terms of practice. Now I have the responsibility of introducing the speaker for the day, who is going to deliver a lecture on regulatory reforms in higher education. He is none other than Professor Furqan Qamar, Secretary General, Association of Indian Universities. Professor Qamar, in his illustrious academic career spanning over 3 decades, has held the position of a professor and a founder, director of Center of Management Studies at Jamia Millia Islamia, a central university in Delhi. He was also advisor education in the Planning Commission of India. He served as Vice Chancellor of the University of Rajasthan at Jaipur, and he went on to become the first and the founder Vice Chancellor of a central university in Himachal Pradesh at Dharmashala. With keen research interest in public policy in higher education, Professor Kamar has been actively engaged in research and has published books and papers in journals of repute on such themes as educational planning and administration, financing of higher education, cost savings and resource use efficiency in education, and quality and excellence in higher education. His research work on resource utilization in higher education provided valuable input in the formulation of higher education policy during the 8th five-year plan. He was also very actively involved in providing inputs in the formulation of 10th and 11th five-year plan strategies for higher education. Professor Furqan Kamar has, during the past 3 decades, chaired and been a member of a large number of committees, working groups and task forces constituted to strategize and implement various aspects of higher education in the country by the Planning Commission, Ministry of Human Resource Development, UGC, ASCT and such other bodies. He has also served as a member of the Executive Council, Governing Board, Academic Council, Finance Committee, faculties or school boards and Board of Studies of many universities in the country. Having widely traveled across the length and breadth of the country and also abroad to Canada, United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Sri Lanka and Malaysia, Professor Kamar has seen and interacted with higher educational leaders in wide-ranging number and different types of universities and colleges. I'm sure he brings with him academic eminence, leadership, lots of other qualities and exposure to the best global practices in the field of higher education. I welcome you, sir, and also thank you for this. Thank you very much.
Professor J.R. Gopal, Secretary of Professor J. Ram Reddy Memorial Trust, to give a brief about the trust and its activities.
Of course, remembering personalities who have made substantial contribution to any walk of life is the responsibility of the society. Since people work for the society, society in turn has to remember them, partly to commemorate their memory, but partly to remember their contribution, but largely to perpetuate the values for which they stood. They labored very hard. If one has to go by that criterion, Professor Ram Reddy belongs to that category of human personalities who is one of those rare combination of administrative capabilities and extremely evolved human attributes. Professor Ram Reddy was our teacher. We were co-authors. He was in one way my doctoral guide, and we became friends. I venture to say that because he was more a friend than a teacher. Particularly myself, Professor V.S. Prasad, we had this great experience of life to be very close to him. It's a time to remember him, but I can give a full-length lecture on Professor Ram Reddy given the long experience and long association I have had with him. We were co-authors and we have done 5 years in Center for Economic and Social Studies, 4 major research projects. We have written a book, Public Policy in Rural Poor, and we have written a number of articles, together. But he was becoming Vice Chancellor of Usman University. I am one of those who believe that Vice Chancellorship can be both an advantage and also a burden. Sometimes it takes away the creativity of a scholar, and that becomes a loss to the creative contribution to the knowledge. But Professor Ram Reddy, after became Vice Chancellor of Usman University, he was equally interested in research, and both of us were working together, and we used to meet late evenings to discuss the ideas, because after he completed his work as Vice Chancellor, he used to come to ICSR guest house. We must have spent hours together. But he was very humane. I mean, he was so warm, humane, would care for you. I can't resist myself remembering two experiences. Why? This is an occasion when Professor Furkan Kamar, who himself was Vice Chancellor of two universities, is here, and Professor Sitaram Rao, young person as Vice Chancellor. He was always one person who also took criticism in an extremely positive way. I mean, I hardly remember a person who can be so open to criticism. Now, I remember this because of partly my own commitment to democratic values, that how criticism can play an important role. In Osmania University, one professor in the law became a big problem. He was a good teacher, but he was a peculiar character. Why he does things one doesn't know, but he became a big nuisance to the administration. So Professor Ram Reddy was so upset. In normal course, he would have given a big rope. He called him twice and warned him, advised him, but he didn't stop doing the mischief. So a stage came where he decided that he should be removed from the service, which to my mind, one of the most painful things perhaps Professor Ram Reddy has done, but he decided. I went on arguing with him that don't use Article 371 2BC, whatever that article which empowers a university to remove an employee without giving any explanation. He can be removed, summarily he can be removed. The article empowers. So he wanted to use that article, and I was opposed to that article. So I went on arguing, you are, as a liberal, as a true liberal, don't use that article, it will become a precedent for other vice chancellors. He said, no, see, now it has become unmanageable. There is nothing left, no option left for me. And he removed him. I was upset, frankly telling you, that a teacher being removed, whatever could be the cause. I was also a little angry. So I went to him and he said, I have removed him. I said, sir, because you are in power, you have exercised your power, but I get a feeling that power is getting into your head. That's what I said. It was great. I mean, say, for somebody like me who was a student to say this to a vice chancellor of one of the most prestigious universities, he looked at me strangely, said, maybe you're right that I have been vice chancellor for too long. This is an unforgettable experience for somebody who could go to his own teacher and tell him that such a harsh thing, because I felt that removing people from the service summarily would set wrong precedent. But Professor Ram Reddy, I mean, if he has taken action, I am not saying that that person perhaps deserved to go, but using a repressive, arbitrary, provision in the act would not really help, because that sets wrong precedents in the institutions. There has to be procedural justice and all that. I recall a happy memory that when I made a presentation, Where is India Going, an international conference, lots of top personalities were there. I had to make a presentation on where is India going. He was also present. And the personality like Sukhmay Chakravarti, Romila Thapar, all these people were there. So after my presentation, when I sat in the car, he said, you made a name for yourself, now you'll survive in the academic. I'm absolutely confident. He took me to a Das Prakash hotel to celebrate, to felicitate. He said it was such a good presentation that I would like to felicitate you. And a student, a teacher so happy that a student has done something. That was Professor Ram Reddy. I mean, it sums up his personality, and as our friend said, that his contribution to education in general and higher education in particular is outstanding. He will be remembered in the history of higher education as one who has contributed to distance. Again, when he was toying with this idea of starting this open university, we were critical, we were skeptical. Because we said it will dilute the education, it is a compromise with the quality of education, and it will become correspondence course, and all sorts of degrees will be given. I mean, these were all our fears. But he was constantly toying with one idea, that on the one hand, the need for the higher education is increasing, it's exploding. Knowledge is also exploding. And no medical doctor, no engineer, no scientist can ever remain up to date unless it's a lifelong learning. Because knowledge is exploding, therefore lifelong learning. I know some of the doctors who have become outdated so fast. Some of the most eminent doctors, today they are there, but nobody even goes to them because the medical world is expanding. So he said that lifelong learning has become the necessity in view of the exploding knowledge. And there is another major development, that is the technology. And a marriage between the advancement in the technology and the demand for higher education is possible. I think this potential that Professor Ram Reddy saw in the emerging scenario of higher education was what I would call an act of genius. Capturing an opportunity, capturing a possibility in a historical process is possible only to those who have a vision, who have a commitment, who have a concern, and who have a farsight. I mean, it's not possible for everybody to venture into unknown area. It could have been even a disaster experiment. I mean, it's also possible. But I think after the Open University, myself, Professor Prasad, we were all involved in the initial stages. We used to come, record our lectures. I mean, it's all new experience for us. The lectures being recorded on the video, the lecture being telecast. I mean, it was all new experience. But I think soon it was proved that the idea had a potential. And that, of course, when he was invited to again help the central government in setting the Indira Gandhi National Open University, if one goes to the Indira Gandhi National Open University, one can see the tremendous potential. Thousands of people working, huge structure. I mean, lakhs of students. I mean, I think I don't know what would happen to higher education if Professor Ram Reddy has not captured the idea at that point of time. Maybe it would have been captured by somebody else, but he captured it at a right point of time. And that's the reason when history of higher education is written, and particularly history of distance education is written, after 100 years, I am sure that people like Professor Ram Reddy will be remembered. Precisely for that reason, that because of his human qualities, because of his academic commitment, because of his administrative capability, because of his creative capability of creating an institution, people like him should be remembered. As I remember Professor Ram Reddy, and when I see the universities, the way they are being managed, I find that people like him were absolutely needed to be in our midst, partly to correct the system, partly to caution the system, partly to internally correct, because he has an ingenious methods of correcting the system internally. And we miss him. The academic world misses him, because I saw him as a UGC chairman, I saw him as an ICSR chairman, I saw him as a NAC chairman. I mean, the way he managed the institutions, he made a substantial contribution. But today, while those were the days of building institutions, today we are demolishing institutions. It's a very tragic situation that we are passing through. I'm so sorry to mention it on this occasion, but I can't restrain myself from saying that, because institution after institution collapsing. My own university, University of Hyderabad, when I go back to the university, I feel so upset. When I go back to my Usman University, I mean, I feel that the institutions are crumbling. A prestigious institution like JNU, I mean, which has made such a contribution, remarkable contribution, is just crumbling. I go to Benares Hindu University, you go to Bardhaman, you go to Baroda. You can't just imagine. These are the Jadhavpur, with which I was associated for some time. All these universities are passing through crisis. What happened to society? Why institutions are crumbling? What happens to civilization if institutions crumble? One really doesn't know. Perhaps Professor Ram Reddy's presence was needed to advise the policy formulators, educationists. In his own way, He was not one of those who would confront and fight. But he would not keep quiet. He would go meet the policy maker, reason out, rationally argue, convince him that in their own interest, why institutions should survive, why institutions should be protected. We miss such a wise counsel in the, in the educational system. As far as the trust is concerned, obviously, a trust like, Professor G. Ram Reddy Memorial Trust ought to have been much more vibrant, ought to have, made perhaps organized many programs. Given our own compulsions or our own commitments, perhaps we have not been able to do justice to the memory of Professor Ram Reddy, but whatever possible, whatever was possible by us, whatever Professor Ram Reddy deserved, we have been organizing memorial lectures, very distinguished people from different walks of life. In fact, if one recalls who are the people who gave memory, I would not like to get into that. But we invited, people from different eminent judges, Supreme Court and High Court judges, eminent academics, renowned activists have given these lectures in the past. These lectures were received very well by the society. For last decade or so, we are also awarding, in the memory of Professor Ram Reddy, a Young Social Scientist Award, and those who received were the most deserving, who have done a rich contribution to the knowledge. Particularly, this award is given Professor Furkanji, that this award is given to the scholars who have made contribution to the areas of public policy, distance education, and rural development, which were very close to Professor Ram Reddy's heart. His doctoral work, his initial scholarly work was in Panchayat Raj, then partly in public policy, and then, of course, to the distance education. In these three areas, any young scholar who makes a distinct contribution is given this award. And this is how we have been remembering Professor G. Ram Reddy. We hope that some younger people will take over the responsibility and continue, because it is worth doing. The job is worth doing. I think some people have to take on the torch and move forward. Perhaps, we may even owe an apology to the society or to the academic community that we have not perhaps preserved Professor Ram Reddy's memory, the rich memory, as richly as it ought to have been done. We have not been able to do that. But nevertheless, whatever is possible, I submit, we have been able to do that. And I am so happy that Professor Furkan Kamar, because I know him when we were a part of the All India Vice Chancellors Conference. I also worked with him in a couple of committees. He is a very pleasant man, very articulate, very pleasant, very open. But he's a professional. He brings a professional touch to whatever he does. And when Professor Sitaram Rao mentioned, I thought he was the right choice to give this memorial lecture. So I, on behalf of the trust, welcome him. On behalf of the Memorial Trust, I welcome all of you. I also thank Professor Sitaram Rao on this occasion for taking this initiative, because for the individual institutions, like trust, very difficult. Institutions are longer than the individual's life. So if an institution takes the responsibility, it continues. And thanks to Professor Sitaram Rao, he came with this initiative, and trust is very happy to collaborate with the Open University, which is creation of Professor Ram Reddy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for explaining about the activities of trust and also about his association, Professor G. Ram Reddy. And now I request our chief guest and the speaker of the day, Professor Furkan Kamarji, to deliver his Professor G. Ram Reddy Memorial Address on regulatory reforms in higher education.
When Professor Ram Reddy was occupying various positions, to have been able to spend time with him, to interact with him. But it was when he was chairman, University Grants Commission, courtesy and thanks to another professor of political science who also belonged to Hyderabad, Professor Bashiruddin Ahmed, who was then Vice Chancellor of Jamia Millia Islamia. I was only an associate professor, so it's courtesy him that I had the pleasure and the privilege of spending some time with Professor Ramareddy ji. The first encounter that I had was under somewhat a very unpleasant kind of situation. In fact, when Professor Ramareddy took over the University Grants Commission, the new education policy has already come. The cost saving and resource use efficiency had become at that time the norm. And of course, these things were being communicated from the University Grants Commission to universities. At that time, Bashiruddin Sahab was Vice Chancellor. I was in charge of the development of the university in addition to my teaching responsibility. And then came a letter from the University Grants Commission that all those positions which have remained vacant for certain number of years or unfilled on certain date, those positions in the central universities stand abolished. And at that time, various selection committees in the universities were selected. And I took this letter to the Vice Chancellor, that now this letter has come. And he said, let's go to University Grants Commission. Bashiruddin Ahmed Sahab was also member of the commission. And later on, I came to know that he and Professor Ramareddy, they were college mates, schoolmates, shared the same discipline, had also played various games together. So without seeking any appointment, Professor Bashiruddin Ahmed and myself went and straight into the room of the chairman of the University Grants Commission. And of course, Bashir Sahab was upset. Ramareddy ji, in his usual style, was saying that yes, we need to rationalize the system of higher education. We need to cut down the flab, and above all, this notification and communication has come from the Ministry of Finance to Ministry of HRD and now to University Grants Commission. So I'm duty bound to communicate to universities. But finally, with lot of arguments, and of course I was a silent spectator, it was argument between Bashir Sahab and Ramareddy ji. They agreed a conclusion. And the conclusion was, and the Bashir Sahab's argument was that have you implemented this circular in this one building of the University Grants Commission? So you first try to implement this in the University Grants Commission and then present a role model to all of us as Vice Chancellor, and then we will implement. So on that note, with a cup of tea, we left his office. And in a very short period of time, I think with a gap of about a few months, that circular was withdrawn. I'm very sure that Professor Ramareddy, in his own style, may have realized the far-reaching implications of those kinds of notifications, may have worked in his own quiet style with the government, although it has never been easy to work with the, or to convince the bureaucracy and the politics, but I think he prevailed. So that was the kind of person that he was, that he would respect divergence of the view. He would also see that, what is best in the interest of the higher education. In fact, although I rarely had the opportunity to listen to the anecdotes which Professor Ramareddy was so famous of sharing, but would always listen from others. For example, one of his favorites used to be that whenever a vice chancellor or an administrator visited him in his office, people say that his question used to be that, do you suffer from any coronary disease, or do you have bypass plant, do you have blood pressure or diabetes? And if the person would say no, he would say that then perhaps you are not doing your job seriously enough. We did not know that Professor Ramareddy himself was working so hard. Maybe perhaps he was working 3 years in 1 year, and that was the reason that he left us so early in his life. That was not the age at which he died. But whatever time he was in our midst, in the higher educationist, he saw the future. Even when he had already undergone 1 or 2 bypasses, surgeries, even then he was thinking of the future of higher education and was working on it, which reminds me of the old story that an old man was planting trees, and the trees which will bear fruit in a fairly long period of time. So the village folk would say that you are almost about to die and you are planting trees, would you live long enough to taste these fruits? And the person said that no, I tasted and I ate those fruits from those plants which were planted by my elders. And it is my bounden duty to plant these trees for the generations to come. And I think the growth and the development of the society takes place only when old men plant trees, not for themselves, but for the generation ahead. And particularly if that plant, that tree is the tree of the kind of education, then not only few taste the fruits, but masses benefit from them. So from the core of my heart, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my tribute to Professor G. Ramareddy. I wish I was old enough to have learned far more, or I wish Professor Ramareddy had lived long enough or had perhaps not worked so hard to have left us so early in his life that we could have benefited from his great deal. I also speak from one limitation, that I am in an open university. Professor Ramareddy, besides his contribution for the general development of the society, his main essential contribution has been also the distance open mode of learning. But in fact, just less than a month ago, there was this round table, and I think this issue had been deliberated. And I thought that I may not be able to bring in anything new than what has already been deliberated and discussed on this. And therefore, I chose to speak on the regulatory reforms, rather the limitations from which the regulation of higher education suffers, and where lies the future. I also must apologize that circumstances did not permit me to write the memorial lecture. When I was asked to come and deliver this lecture, there was almost about 12-13 days time, and most of this time I was traveling. So I sought permission that I'll speak orally with the help of the PowerPoint presentation. I know that memorial lecture must always be read, so kindly pardon me for this deviation, and thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I would begin with this diagram which I recently had to make. When I was invited, there is one speakers research initiative in which they invite some people to interact with the members of the parliament, to sensitize them about various issues relating to economy and on which some bills, etc. comes. So I was once invited to speak on education and higher education, the challenges, and particularly the kind of trajectory the higher education is taking place and what the nation should do. And one of the questions which MPs posed, they agreed to most of my presentation, but then they said that education is like any other sector, so why should we focus so much more, and where is the money for that education? And then there was another session fixed. So for another session I had prepared this. I said the democracy, and to strengthen democracy, we have so far been talking about these 4 pillars on which the edifice of modern democracy stands. And we are doing so much to protect, to safeguard these 4 pillars of democracy. We all know the legislature, the judiciary, the executive, and also media. But then I said that whenever people talk about these 4 pillars, I wonder that any pillar, and particularly pillars that support any edifice or any buildings, they have to rest on foundations. What is that foundation? And to me, the more we think, this foundation is education. No pillar, howsoever is strong, would survive or sustain on a weak foundation. Rather, a weak pillar might remain tall and stand for some time on a weak foundation, but stronger the pillar, and if the foundation is not commensurately strong, the edifice would collapse, and therefore we need to focus on this foundation. Our forefathers had laid a very strong foundation, but now this foundation needs to be continuously reinforced. So I think this is the basis on which my whole lecture would be presented. It was this foundation and the strong foundation that was laid that today we have the largest system of higher education found anywhere in the world, and you are all aware. No other country has as many educational institutions as we have in our country. How many universities? Number would vary depending on the source that you use. All India Survey of Higher Education said 933. Our own numbers in AIU said 1033. Some other number that I got was 1068. Around 38,000 colleges, 10,000 standalone institutions. And in terms of enrollment, we have become second largest system of higher education found anywhere in the world. So in terms of institution, the first largest. In terms of enrollment, the second largest. We have surpassed United States of America. We are next to China, but about Chinese statistics, we still have some question marks. That have we really, are they really ahead? And our participation rates in higher education has also been rising, and today is about approximately 26% in the age group of 18 to 23. Within the brackets are the number written that much of these developments we have been able to achieve post-independence. Not only that, even on parameters of the equity and the social justice, we have done a great deal preeminently after independence. For example, how many women were there in higher education, as a student even, or as a teacher even. So it was because the foundation was laid, and now this foundation is under challenge, and the challenge is coming from a thought process. We all knew right from the very beginning, and we still say that there are 3 essentials that we must try to focus and achieve and accomplish in higher education. We are a large country, very big country. We are still a young country. People in India aspire to receive highest level of education, even if the family has to sacrifice food. So we need to expand our higher education system to accommodate the ever-rising need. So we have also been experimenting various modes. Open, distance, virtual, online modes is one of the modes in which we are trying to expand the system, but also the formal face-to-face learning that need to be expanded. Second thing, we had realized, and so far we have been pursuing this agenda, that higher education need to be exclusive. And a variety of arguments could be cited in favor of that. At a more mundane level, we can cite that the expansion would not be possible unless we make higher education inclusive and accessible and affordable by all sections of the society. Just to cite one example, for all of us sitting on the dais and for most of you sitting here in this hall, for your children, the gross enrollment ratio would certainly be higher than 100%. You may not have faced, we did not face the difficulty of getting our children receiving higher education. The only problem could have been the choice between X kind of an institution or Y kind of an institution, or within India or abroad, but all our children went to higher education. If the national average is still about, so this 100% is more than the average of the United States of America, which claims to have the highest level of gross enrollment ratio of 85%. If the national average is still about 25 or 26%, the question arises that who are the people who are left out? Because it is the 100% of 5% of the population, and maybe just about 2% of the gross enrollment ratio or 3% of the gross enrollment ratio for about 73-75% of the population gives us this average of 25%. This conference of the vice chancellors, which Professor Hargopal just referred, that was a precursor to the formulation of the 11th plan. It was Professor Thorat's idea to let's work, let's share and discuss, and let us evolve the policies for the development of higher education. So various people were working on various themes. I was working on the angles of the quality and also on this idea of the inclusion, along with Professor Ravi Srivastava and Sachi Sinha, and I think with you also, Professor Hargopal. And then we found that there are segments of the society which are left out. For example, one permutation and combination, and then you identified that if you live in a rural area, if you do not own land, if you are an agricultural labor, if you are a woman, then for you, the participation rate in higher education is less than 2%. So these were the vulnerable groups. I think one of the biggest achievements that higher education in India can claim is that it has taken those vulnerable kind of people and raised them to the level that we are standing here today, and to whatever extent we could celebrate this accomplishment is less. Almost 90% of the people who occupy any position worth the name today belong to that category, and it was education, because it was available, it was easily available, it was almost freely available, that everybody could access. Maybe we have crossed that threshold, but still almost 73-74% of the population, which is in the same situation in which we were, when we were these students. So in equity and the inclusion is important. And of course, if we expand higher education, we also able to provide higher education to everyone. But if this higher education is not of quality, then also perhaps the purpose would not be served. I am aware that there is not a single definition of the quality. There are many definitions of quality. But gradually we seems to be reaching a conclusion, or already reached a conclusion, that since a single measure of quality does not serve our purpose, so it is a metric of the measures which combine various measures of the quality are to be taken. But I would certainly say that measuring quality in terms of employability is a very narrow view. Employability was supposed to be one of the tangential outcome of higher education, but the essential purpose of the higher education was creation, generation of new knowledge to take the society further higher up, to address the issues and the problem which the society faces at all points in time. Therefore, research, therefore community engagement, therefore upliftment of the society, making a good citizenship, education. So I think it's the metrics that has to be taken. Why I emphasize so much on this angle was that right from independence until, I would say, late 90s, the idea was that all of these three things are equally important and they have to be addressed simultaneously and equally. Lately, we started hearing initially low voices, but now those voices are becoming shriller. They are saying that we have sacrificed quality for the sake of equity. We have expanded the system and the quantity has come at the cost of the quality. And therefore people have, to use the terms in economics that we use, they have started talking about some kind of a trade-off between quantity and the quality, between equity and the quality. And more recently, they have started saying that no, we should focus more on quality than on equity, than on expansion. But if we study the development of higher education across the world, we find that most of the countries which are known for quality education by any measures of quality, there were those who addressed all of these issues simultaneously, not necessarily with the same strategy that we adopted. For example, the United States didn't have any reservation, but they positively had affirmative action. There was a weaker affirmative action, and therefore still this society is not as inclusive as it should have been, particularly with respect to color. And therefore, my view is that this expansion, equity, and excellence are like triple helix that define the genes of higher education. You take away one and the gene gets mutated. Will it get mutated favorably or adversely? Existing present evidence are that it gets mutated adversely, not for the welfare of the people. Now I'm coming to the main core theme of the regulation and why regulation has become important. In fact, our constitution does not use term regulation. It was the coordination and the maintenance of standards in higher education, this entry 63 and so on and so forth. And of course, amongst the directive principle, our constitution also says that every one of us collectively and individually we try to strive for excellence. So I'm taking it from there. So regulation was nowhere mentioned. It was coordination and maintenance of standards. Initially, all higher education was being provided through public provisioning. In fact, pre-independence, a number of private initiatives, philanthropic initiatives had come up for a variety of reasons. Maybe it may have begun from the missionaries, but lately during freedom movement, many people set up educational institutions with the idea that we need to have nationalistic education. I teach at Jamia Millia Islamia, which has a genesis in that movement. So a large number of institutions came up because we needed to promote our culture, our heritage, need to teach people our language. But post-independence, what we did, we in fact evolved this system of grants in aid and almost like taking over whatever private sector existed, because thought process was that it is the responsibility of the state. When we were dependent, when we were ruled by the colonial time, it was the responsibility of the society to educate our children. Now we have become independent, we are a sovereign nation, the government represents society, and therefore it is the responsibility of the government. Things continued till 80s to some extent, but early 80s onwards, we had kind of studies coming in saying that, look, government will never have enough money, and if there is not enough money, then primary education, basic education, elementary education is a necessity. Government would focus on that. School education up to senior secondary school education should be the next priority. And then higher education could be left to individuals themselves. In fact, some World Bank studies came up by using economic analysis by saying that education has private benefits and the social benefits, private return and the social returns. They said in elementary education, there is hardly any private return. Wage rate of an illiterate worker and the wage rate of an elementary 8th class pass person is almost the same. When you do intermediate, wage rate for a school graduate, intermediate or +2, is higher, so there are larger private return, but still the social return dominates. And then they came up with the study saying that in case of higher education, most of the return emanates to the individual who receive higher education. So we in India also bought this argument. We started working on it. New education policy and the program of action was in fact reflective of this. Although by 2001, the same World Bank took a U-turn. They said, no, even higher education has a very high social returns, particularly when we are moving in the knowledge economy and the knowledge society, because this knowledge comes. And that reminds me that another person who is again belonging to Andhra, combined Andhra, Professor Tilak, at that time he was doing a similar studies and was showing that even in India, even from higher education, the social returns are higher than the private return, and therefore state has a responsibility. But anyway, we moved on. Private sector entered, and private sector entered in a big way. Today, almost 64% of the total enrollments are in the private sector. In case of engineering and management education, the proportion is much higher. public institutions are suffering from underinvestments, which you already referred to, and then was felt a need to regulate higher education. Earlier, the only instrument of the regulation was the grants in aid. So if they see that you get enough money and you are still not doing well, there was a threat that the grant would be stopped. Or if they see that there are certain areas that need to be strengthened, they provided additional grants for those disciplines, for those centers, those sectors to develop. Now, with bulk of education being provided by the private sector, that lever became ineffective, and therefore they needed to have the regulator. But essentially, these regulators, which are now part, that they must further the national goals and priorities. Now you should ask this question to yourself, that to what extent have we been successful? Protect and preserve autonomy of the universities, that has been one of the goals. How free and how autonomous universities have become over time? Question. Also at the same time ensure accountability, and of course the universities are being held accountable more intensely. Then of course provide adequate fundings, ensure quality and excellence. One of the essentials of the regulation was to check proliferation of the low quality, poor quality higher educational institutions, so that all institutions should be of quality, curb and deter malpractices, support and incentivize performance. I think if I sum this up, I think the whole idea was promote excellence in higher education, and also in an equitable way. Have we succeeded in that? And to be able to do that, we now have a plethora of regulatory agencies. You are all aware. We now have almost 14, 15 different regulatory bodies. On top of it, states have also started setting up regulatory commissions. And now once again we are talking about having one single regulator. National Knowledge Commission said IRAHE, Independent Regulatory Authority in Higher Education. Yashpal Committee used altogether different arguments and different logic, more academics. But then they said National Commission for Higher Education Research. Very lately we heard that now we shall have a HERA, Higher Education and Empowerment Regulatory Authority. Then we know that now a draft bill was in public domain for HESI, Higher Education Commission of India. So from a single regulator to multiple regulators to once again we are talking about single regulator. And why we are doing that? Because there is a growing realization that the regulations is not working for the purpose for which the regulator should have been. And in fact, for the past 4 years, I have been trying to make sense of this. There are plenty of anecdotal evidence, but I was trying to collect some statistical and empirical evidences on which I have written, and now I am going to present this. And based on these empirical evidences and some of the evidences I'll present quickly, I have found based on empirical evidences that quality of higher education is inversely proportional to the intensity of regulation. What does this mean? That absence of regulation does not destroy necessarily higher education in the country, nor very excessive regulation promotes quality of higher education. And independent regulators do not necessarily ensure better funding for higher education, nor independent regulators do not necessarily secure greater autonomy. Another anecdote, which I'm not very sure, but people say is connected to Professor G. Ramareddy, that in some meeting, at some fora, a question was asked that is the University Grants Commission autonomous? And Professor Ramareddy's reply was, yes, it's fully autonomous, and I have permission of my minister to say so. So independent regulators do not necessarily secure greater autonomy for higher educational institutions, and they also are not able to ensure accountability. Let me present briefly the evidences. You know that the NIRF, National Institutional Ranking Framework, was introduced. What I did was that we know that in India, higher education's development can be divided over 4 phases. First 3 universities were in 1856, 1857. From 1857 until 1925, there were no regulator. In 1925, this Inter-University Board, the precursor of the Association of Indian Universities, came. So from no regulator, we moved to loose coordination, because this IUB used to discuss, and resolution of this association would become a kind of policy. This continues until 56. But then the UGC came in 1956. So from 57 until 87, but I have taken the period of 1992 because the AICT, etc., took some time to stabilize. That was the time of the single regulator. And post 1992, we had a flood of regulator. NCTA, Distance Education Council, Rehabilitation Council, even those professional bodies like Medical Council and so on and so forth, they also became overactive in regulating the higher education. So these 4 phases also symbolizes the intensity of the regulation. No regulation, to moderate regulation, to single regulation, and to multiple regulation. And I was trying to see that the universities set up in various periods, how are they doing today in the country? And you know that the universities set up during the period of no regulation, 57% of them are ranked amongst the top 100. And those which were set up post 1992, multiple regulator, only 6% of them are there. As the intensity of regulation is going up, the data shows that the proportion of the universities coming under NIRF, which is again the governmental ranking, has declined. So the curves are moving into. Now you could say, I'll come to that data, you could say that universities are like, they grow with the age, and the older that they become, better that they would become. So I'm linking it with these periods are linked to the age factor. So I'll answer to this question, that why is this age is not important in determining this. When this article was published in the Indian Express, the University Grants Commission countered, saying that I have based all these on the basis of NIRF, which itself is new, where methodology is still evolving, and therefore the whole argument is flawed. And then I had to work with various other parameters. So I took the NAC accreditation, that how many of these universities established at various points in time are rated amongst top 10. Again, the same situation, as intensity of regulation is going up, the proportion of the universities in the NIRF declining. I said, okay, NAC also is subject to some criticism. Then I took another data. Somehow our founding father and the Radhakrishnan Commission itself, they said that higher education need to be insulated from the bureaucracy and from the politics. And therefore they conceived this University Grants Commission. But somehow they thought that the management and the technical education could still remain under MHRD. They did not come under the purview of the University Grants Commission. They were directly funded by the ministry. They were also in some way regulated by the ministry. So now we have two kinds of institutions. One, which come under the purview of the University Grants Commission, All India Council for Technical Education, National Council for Teacher Education, Distance Education Council. On the other hand, we have another kind of institutions which are directly under ministry. And you see that those institutions which are under the regulators, they are doing far worse than the universities which are directly under bureaucracy or the politics. Is the bureaucracy more benevolent to universities? My understanding is that since they have so many other thing else to do, so they do not have 100% focused attention, so they have found some mechanisms, some norms, and have largely left the IITs, NITs, ICES to take their own decision. The regulatory bodies under which the other institution comes, they have nothing else to do but to regulate higher education. So they are working overboard to see that we are tamed all the time. So now you see, so this age argument gets nullified. It was not like the examples of the wine, the older it gets, the better it becomes. Age was a factor. But even dividing line is under regulator and outside regulator, so they are doing well. In the NIRF ranking, you are also aware that from 2007 onwards, many new centrally funded institutions were set up. So some 15 central universities were set up in every state where they had none. ICERs were set up. New IITs were set up. So irrespective of the age, starting from 2008 until 2016-17, these institutions were set up. Out of 15 new central universities, none of them could make amongst the top 100 of the NIRF. As compared to that, 38% of the IITs, 67% of the ICES, 4 out of 6, and 43% of the IIMs, that is 3 out of 7, are now reckoned amongst the top 100 institutions under the NIRF. Again, as you know, IITs, IIMs, ICES, they are not under the regulators' framework. Look at the QS ranking. Again, the same data. So if our NIRF and our NAC is not reliable, we find a relatively larger proportion of the institution outside the purview of the regulator are doing better in terms of the proportion of them being ranked and also the level at which they are ranked. Only exception is the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, which comes under the regulator, but for a long time we had left ISC Bangalore alone. It is only lately that we are trying to force them. So it is the QS World Ranking, it is the Times Higher Education World Ranking, the same data, same evidence. It is the QS Asia Ranking, same finding. It is the Times Higher Education Asia Ranking, same finding. I am presenting 2016 data, but I am continuously following this data. Even the latest 2018-19 data, the finding does not change, it stays The BRICS ranking, the same situation. It means our regulators are not able to provide the leadership, ensure autonomy, and promote excellence, and that has to be addressed. But all of these things cannot be attributed totally to the failure of the regulators. There are other reasons, and just 2-3 slides more. Kindly be patient. Perhaps I spend more time on introduction. This is just one evidence. What I did was that those top 100 universities of the world, by any of these ranking, by average ranking, and then I compared it to the India's best institutions, not the average of the institution. Average is far weaker. So the world's best higher education institution, they are fairly large in size, approximately about 18 to 20,000. India, this size is half. In terms of faculty, most of them have a faculty size of around 2,000 plus. Only exception is ETH Zurich, which has only less than 500 teachers. But ETH Zurich, we know, is a very different kinds of institutions. In India, the best higher educational institution, the faculty size is around 600. There are only 4 or 5 universities in the country where sanctioned faculty strength is 2,000 or a little more. But actual faculty present on the campus is half of that, 1,000. Student-teacher ratio, because of ETH Zurich, this number is coming out to 12 for the world's best. And in India, it is because of the IITs that it is coming out to be 16. Otherwise, if you dissect, so average of the central universities is 1:53 is the teacher-student ratio. For open universities, of course, because of the different modes, it is 1:2000 is the ratio, approximately. These world's best universities have about 73 Nobel laureates on an average, these 20 universities. In India, big question mark. Financial resources, and I think this is critical. World's best higher educational institution, at that time there were about 16 of Indian universities coming among best. I had taken 16 top world's best. Average endowment $9.28 billion US. Annual budget $2.47 billion for approximately on an average of 20,000 students. In India, the best of India, $0.061 billion. India's best universities, because of the ISC Bangalore, the numbers have come like this. Per student budget of these best universities in the world is $1,67,000 per student per year. India's best, $7,000. In terms of the per capita income, purchasing power parity, 27,000. We spent 1/16 of what the world spent, and expecting a quality of what they are spending. And why endowment is important? Because endowment insulates them from any kind of interference, because you are not dependent. Maybe separately I can share. Now coming to this, the regulators fail because we often say, we assume that there is a design defect and therefore they have failed. It is possible that there is a design defect. Maybe at that time you planned a regulator for a small size, for a certain kinds of dispensation. But then institutions also fail because of the leadership lag. And here, the status versus stature, capabilities, credibilities, these are all important. Any organization could also fail because of the people's problem. Either you do not have adequate number of people, or you do not have competent people, or you do not have committed people, or you do not have that motivation in people. Just remind Dr. Zakir Hussain used to say that for institution building, you need resources. और उर्दू में कहते थे कि इदारा बनाने के लिए सामान की ज़रूरत होती है, लेकिन सामान से भी ज़्यादा इदारे बनाने के लिए अरमान चाहिए होता है. अगर सारे सामान इकट्ठे हो जाएं और अरमान ख़त्म हो जाए तो वो इमारतें, वो सब सामान उस इदारे का मकबरा बन जाते हैं. So this passion, Arman is passion, this motivation, this commitment is needed. So organization could also fail because of these reasons. Importantly enough, the socio-cultural context in which an organization, a regulator function is very important. For example, those of you from sociology or social sciences background, you know that if society is very individualistic society, it may have 10 problems, but then in an individualistic society, the recommendations, the favors, they do not work. People are so individualistic that then they have the commitment to their profession. So what is the kind of social context? India is a kind of context where hardly anybody could claim that wherever the person has reached, he has reached without using any favor. And of course, then these are exploited. And then of course, we are a society where the familial traditions are very strong. So even if I am very, very committed to merit, how can I say no to the elder brother of my father? Sometimes it becomes difficult. These are the context. Economic constraints, that if you are not funding well, of course you will not be able to get the enough quality. And then of course, the technological compulsions also lead to or also result into failure of the institutions. So we need to understand. I think merely assuming that the regulator, the UGC, the AICT, they suffered from design defect, and therefore you need to bring in a new institution of a new design is the only solution. Somehow that does not make sense to me. I also have another evidence from our own historical development. UGC was 1956, AICT is 1987, but somehow AICT proved to be much less effective sooner than the University Grants Commission. So is the case with the Teachers Council, so is the case with the Distance Education Council. All of these councils were designed differently and were designed at different point of time. So there is no guarantee that a new design institution that you set up today would prove to be a better institutions. Finally, our paradigm is changing. We need to have a regulator which should be capable enough to handle, to address the large and the complex system, need to be creative, speedy decision making, should work and leverage with the network advantage of the globally so that continuously you are in touch, should be agile and responsive, should be evolving and learning. In all, coordination is the substance, facilitation is the substance. Anybody who assumes that all knowledge vests with me only is going to cause serious damage to higher education. Lastly, performance and delivery is the key for higher education. but somehow perception and credibility is critical. How good is an institution on objective parameter is one thing, but how do you perceive that institutions? I think what people like Professor Ramareddy did was that not only they were trying to build excellent institution, but they were also trying to create perception of excellence about these institutions, because they make significant difference. Protecting the turf and the territory may be important, but partnering for synergy is vital. I think we need to work together. Uniformity and standardization may have been imminent, but then they pull down all institutions to a lowest common denominator. And therefore, we need to be creative, innovative, and therefore diversity is crucial for taking higher education forward. Process may have been important, but it is the outcome that matter. And at the end, I will say that we often talk of big ticket reforms, structural reforms, but when we talk about structural reforms and big ticket reforms, that also causes uncertainty. It takes a long time. And during that gestation period, all institutions suffer. And the big ticket reforms, there is also no guarantee that they would bring in results. So I have realized, and also sometimes people say that change people, organization would improve. But supposing if you remove everybody from this university, and by whatever method you choose, same number of people by another design, chances are that the average quality and the average commitment would be the same, because they are to be drawn from the same national pool. I think the future would lie in reforming our processes and procedure and the way we do things, and that brings in transparency, that brings in autonomy, that brings in accountability, and that is where the future is. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for this opportunity. It was a privilege to be here, and thank you very much.